Superheroes in the Marvel Universe are celebrities in their own right. Sure, most of them aren't doing it for the fame, but on the other hand, when your life is saved by somebody swinging around in a brightly colored costume, that is something you tend to remember. Many civilians of Marvel follow the exploits of superheroes just like we follow athletes and singers and movie stars in the real world. Of course, superheroing provides a very different kind of celebrity than all of those other jobs do, but what if it didn't? What if there was a superhero who was famous as a hero and also famous in a far less supernatural way? Today we're going to be talking about Wonder Man, a character who is an action hero in multiple senses of the word, flying around and stopping villains on the silver screen in Hollywood, and in the real Marvel Universe with his very legitimate actual superpowers. Paralleling that very nicely, Wonder Man is also the star of an MCU show which is going to release, looking at the date, a few days after this recording. That was not coincidental timing, of course. If you're looking for a breakdown of the inspiration for that show and comics origin of the character, this is the video for you. So without further ado, let's talk about Marvel's premier Hollywood hero, who is also about to be a real hero premiering in real Hollywood through the MCU in just a couple of days. Whatever, you get where I'm going with that, let's just get started. While Wonder Man's main claim to fame in the modern day is being Marvel's Hollywood-affiliated superhero, he would take a while to get to that status quo, and his original status was very different. His origin story is... how do I phrase this? It's fast. And I know that fast is a weird way to describe a character's origin, but as I explain this, hopefully you'll get what I mean. Wonder Man first appeared in the first Avengers series, and in fact, he was in issue 9 of that comic, which firmly cements Wonder Man as a Year 1 Avengers character. In this issue, we meet Simon Williams, son of billionaire industrialist Sanford Williams and heir to his company, Williams Innovations. Well, technically, Simon was not the firstborn of his father. He had an older brother named Eric, but Eric was a psychopath and therefore did not end up inheriting his father's company, which totally won't be a plot point later. Thus, Simon began learning and training from a young age to eventually carry on the legacy of his father's company, but that training was not something he got to complete, as Sanford died unexpectedly, leaving Simon in charge of all of Williams' innovations at the very young age of 20. Despite his best efforts, Simon turned out to be extremely bad at business, and Williams Innovations was almost immediately plunged directly into the toilet, made even worse by the fact that the company was in direct competition with another business, just a tiny, irrelevant one in the Marvel Universe, a little company called Stark Industries. So you can guess how that went. Desperate to stop everything from crumbling around him, Simon decided to go to his older brother for advice. You see, Eric Williams had independently gotten rich, and when Simon asked how he had done it, his answer was simple. Just do some organized crime, dude. Thus, Simon Williams began doing illicit business with the mob, and that went about as poorly as everything else that he had tried. He was caught almost instantly, brought into trial, and this is where Avengers issue 9 picks up. As Simon's downfall was going on, evil plans were being made elsewhere by none other than classic Avengers foe Baron Zemo and his very subtly named villain team, the Masters of Evil. Zemo had just recently developed a new method of giving people superpowers, and needed somebody easily manipulated that he could try it out on. Fortunately for him, the trial of Simon Williams was making headlines, and a disgruntled businessman with a criminal history and personal vendetta against Tony Stark was exactly what he was looking for. Convinced by the chance for revenge on one of his main competitors, Simon agrees, and the villains take him to Zemo's base in the Amazon jungle, where they subject him to the treatment which mostly consists of bombardment with ionic rays. As vague as the comic book science is there, the procedure does work, giving Simon abilities similar to those from an amped up super soldier serum. He is now incredibly strong, fast, and durable, with an emphasis on durable, as Simon is now basically indestructible by normal means. Once Simon is empowered, Zemo reveals the next stage of his plan. See, his new villain is not going to join the Masters of Evil, at least not directly. Rather, Zemo's intent is for Simon to join the Avengers as a double agent and eventually lead them into a trap. To suit this fake identity, Zemo gives Simon the code name of Wonder Man and provides him with his first costume, which looks, it looks festive, I'll give it that. I don't know what it is about these specific shades of green and red, but those and the weird loopy pattern on the torso really make me see Wonder Man as like a Christmas-themed guy, but he will get a better costume later. So now we have the costume, we have the powers, and we have the plan. Zemo has set Simon up to be a very convincing fake hero, but there is one more part to the scheme which is extremely important. Zemo is obviously not just going to empower a guy who he literally just met and then send him off to join a superhero team. He has a failsafe in place. While the ionic ray procedure that Simon underwent did give him powers, it was also fundamentally flawed, and after being subjected to it, Simon had about a week to live. But in the eyes of Baron Zemo, this was a feature, not a bug. He had preemptively developed a solution to this, a sort of antidote that would counteract Simon's radiation poisoning, but this was not a permanent solution and would only extend his life for about another week, meaning that Wonder Man was going to have to return to Zemo for another dose every couple of days, and if he flipped sides and joined the Avengers for real, no more antidote, no more Wonder Man. Now that Wonder Man has been informed on his role, the Masters of Evil return to New York City and stage a robbery so big and intentionally over the top that the Avengers have to notice. Then when they arrive on the scene, they are joined by this mysterious new hero who is so strong that the villains almost immediately run away. The Avengers are immediately curious about this newcomer, and when Captain America begins questioning him, Simon responds, "I am called Wonder Man, and I am from the heart of the Amazon jungles." Just to clarify what we're working with here, Simon Williams is a white man from New Jersey. So if this doesn't sound like the best cover story in the world, that's because it's not. Wonder Man then expresses his desire to join the Avengers, and the team takes him somewhere private, or at least somewhere they think is private. Zemo is watching through a hidden camera to discuss more details on the man. At this point, we are given Wonder Man's entire fake backstory, which is not that he was from South America, but rather that he was vacationing there. At some point during that, he was captured by Baron Zemo and experimented on, which is how he got his powers. He was eventually able to escape the villain's clutches, but kept his abilities, then seeking out the Avengers so that he could use them to do some good. This is a pretty believable superhero origin story, save for one specific part, which is that even in Wonder Man's fake cover story, he still got his powers from Baron Zemo, which is a weirdly unnecessary bit of truth to leave in there. Because of this poor writing choice, and I don't mean the writers of the comic, I mean Zemo writing this backstory, Captain America picks up on exactly what's going on immediately, like literally in the next panel. Wonder Man finishes talking and Cap goes, "No, it doesn't ring true. I admit Zemo has the skill to increase a man's strength, but he also has the brains to stop you from escaping. Unless this is a trick planned by Zemo himself." This evil plan has been going on for maybe 20 minutes at most, and it is already blown all the way open. But the Masters of Evil apparently have a sort of backup plan in the form of the Enchantress, who is a mind controller. Enchantress, who is currently in Zemo's base located in the Amazon rainforest, casts a spell on Steve in New York City. And that is not me like laughing at a continuity error in this book. No, it says halfway across the globe, explicitly there on the page. And that somehow works, meaning that Steve now believes Wonder Man's entire story. Honestly, I don't know why Zemo didn't lead with that. That seems like a pretty good plan B. At this point, you might be picking up on why I called Wonder Man's origin fast earlier, but he continues, adding another element of truth to his fake story. He tells the Avengers that he is dying, and now just believing him because of magic, the team commits to helping him find a cure. Some time passes, and eventually the day arrives for the villains to spring their trap. Wonder Man returns to the Masters of Evil HQ, and from there sends out a fake distress call to the Avengers, claiming that he's been recaptured by Zemo and needs their help to escape once more. The Avengers take the bait and are quickly dispatched by Zemo's pre-planned countermeasures for each of them, including Iron Man getting taken down by a big magnet. That is all it took. This really is a comic from the 1960s. Once the heroes are defeated, Zemo prepares to kill them, but this finally is too much for Simon's conscience. He recalls how kind the Avengers were to him even in their brief time together, and so instead of standing by and letting Zemo finish the job, Wonder Man instead frees the trapped Thor. The Masters of Evil realize that the jig is up from here and immediately book it, escaping to fight another day with no casualties on either side. Or rather, one casualty who was on both sides, depending on how you look at it. After all, Wonder Man's flipping sides did not come without a cost. Now that Zemo is gone, Simon is not getting his antidote, and he succumbs to the radiation poisoning, redeeming himself but dying in the process. I guess right then and there in the final page of this issue, as he is not in the issue after this. And speaking of issues, let's talk about the issue structure of this arc before we move on really quickly. As I said, Wonder Man debuted in Avengers issue 9. He was a disgruntled businessman, then he was recruited by the Masters of Evil, he got powers, he joined the Avengers, he eventually betrayed the Avengers, and then redeemed himself, dying in the process. And his death is also in Avengers issue 9. All of this takes place in one singular issue. You see what I mean about his origin being fast? Now, credit where credit is due to Stan Lee and Don Heck, who created this issue. There is a complete story here. Wonder Man's first arc has a clear beginning, middle, and end, and a lot of good emotional beats nestled in there. It's just that they cover it at speedster pace, and then it's just over. Like I said a second ago, Wonder Man is not in Avengers issue 10. He is just in issue 9, and then things move on. Now, of course, Wonder Man would not just be gone forever. This would be a weirdly underwhelming video if that were the case. But this is also not a comic book death trope, where a character dies and then just comes back to life perfectly fine 2 or 3 issues later. No, Wonder Man would die in Avengers issue 9 and would not get another normal appearance until Avengers issue 151. However, the key word there is normal appearances. Sure, Simon Williams was dead and would remain dead for over a decade, but he kept mattering during that time. I believe the term here is haunting the narrative. The death of Wonder Man just kept affecting arcs in the coming years, sometimes in very random ways. The first consequence of this whole incident is a reasonable one though, at least by comic book standards. It goes back to Simon's older brother, Eric Williams. Eric had heard about the death of his brother and somehow found out roughly what had occurred, so he had used his own mob connections, remember he had those, to acquire some super tech and become the villain known as the Grim Reaper. As Grim Reaper, he would try to kill the Avengers as payback for letting his brother die, even though they weren't really responsible for Simon's death in any sense, but whatever. He would be foiled by Black Panther, but would remain a recurring villain going forward. Like I said, this makes enough sense. Guy dies, and now his brother wants revenge. That is a comic book trope. Now, things are going to get substantially weirder again. Only a few comics later, in Avengers issue 58, Simon would matter again, still extremely dead, but revealed to be a vital component in the origin story of the Vision. This issue is all about the Avengers discovering Vision's true origin, which does differ pretty substantially from the MCU iteration of it, so I will speedrun that story very quickly for anyone who's not familiar with these comics. Vision was created by Ultron, but not simply as an upgraded body for Ultron to inhabit. The Synthezoid, as he is called, was meant to be a separate being, basically Ultron's child whom he was going to send against the Avengers. And as a separate being, he had his own programming and basically his own consciousness. As good as Ultron is with machines, though, he is not capable of creating a separate conscious being completely from scratch. He makes conscious beings all the time, that is a recurring thing with Ultron, but he does not do it out of nothing. He needs a framework to base the new mind on, some sort of brainwave patterns that have been scanned already, which Ultron can then modify into new programming. And in the case of the Vision, the brainwave pattern that Ultron used was that of Wonder Man. This comic reveals that Simon did not die immediately after the fight with the Masters of Evil. Rather, the Avengers were able to take him back to one of their labs and scan his brainwave patterns so that, quote, he could live again another day in another form. Then, years later, when Ultron broke his way out of Hank Pym's lab, yes, Ultron in the comics was created by Hank Pym, not Tony Stark, he left with as much data as he could steal, and that included the copied brainwave patterns of Wonder Man. Now, very importantly, this does not mean that Vision is Wonder Man reincarnated. The Avengers did not capture the soul of Simon Williams or anything like that. They just had a data scan of more or less how his brain worked. This also does not mean that Vision has the memories of Wonder Man. Ultron modified the brain scans very heavily before putting them into his synthezoid. All it really means is that Vision and Wonder Man theoretically share some base personality elements, though the two aren't often written in a similar way. The actual purpose of this from a writing and world-building perspective is that this is the thing which proves that Vision is not just an emotionless android that is mimicking feelings. His brain is based on an actual guy, and that actual guy had a lot of conflicting thoughts about his place in the world and whether he was good or evil. The end of this issue is this very overdramatic panel which states even an android can cry, and yeah, that's what all this was about. It proves that Vision is human fundamentally. The connection between Vision and Simon would matter on occasion even before Wonder Man's official resurrection. At one point, Grim Reaper got his hands on his brother's corpse and tried to convince Vision that he could put Vision's mind into his brother's dead body, basically making him a real boy, even though that, of course, did not end up happening. Wonder Man stayed so consistently dead that he was even technically dead during his next real speaking role. This was during a Kang the Conqueror arc, where Kang pulled a bunch of dead Avengers characters out of time and then controlled them as henchmen. So Wonder Man was around and he was talking and doing things, but only for a couple issues as a ghost of a past failure, and his body was still just sitting somewhere. Then, finally, after years, we get to Avengers 151, where Wonder Man comes back. Not as a flashback, not as a weird time ghost. No, Wonder Man is around for real in the main timeline. But something is distinctly not right about him. He's shambling around, he can barely talk, he doesn't seem entirely conscious. Hell, he arrived at the Avengers HQ in a crate, like somebody shipped him there. It's very clear that Simon Williams is no longer quite dead, but he's also definitely not quite alive. Wonder Man has returned as a Zuvembi. Yeah, you heard that right. Zuvembi. Explaining the word Zuvembi here would be something of a tangent, but you know what? It is an interesting tangent, so screw it, I'll talk fast, let's go. In 1954, a psychiatrist named Frederick Wortham published a book very dramatically named The Seduction of the Innocent, which was an extremely targeted attack on the comic book industry, blaming comics for a moral decline in America and a rise of juvenile delinquency. The book was, to put it bluntly, a bunch of bullshit. The Seduction of the Innocent was mostly projections of Wortham's own opinions. People have looked into his quote-unquote research in the years since, and all of it is horribly biased. Nothing in this book actually holds up to real scientific scrutiny. But unfortunately, it caught on fast in the 1950s, especially among conservative America. Parents became terrified that comics were going to turn their kids gay, which was one of Wortham's biggest claims, and it set off a moral panic across the entire genre, leading to the creation of a group called the Comics Code Authority. The CCA was not a government body. In fact, it was created very specifically to avoid that kind of thing. What the Comics Code Authority actually was all the major comic publishers getting together and agreeing on a set of rules and guidelines about what they could and could not publish, just as a way to placate the angry mob before people started calling for actual government censorship. By the CCA's regulations, a lot of topics were banned. Anything sexual, a lot of horror-related things, anything that even remotely sounded queer for half a second, publishers were not allowed to touch any of that stuff. However, the rules established by the authority were literal to a fault, which allowed for about 1 billion loopholes. For example, zombies? Absolutely not. That's horror, that's dark magic, that is definitely not allowed. But literature? Literature's fine, that's great, people love books. And Robert E. Howard, author of Conan the Barbarian, one time mentioned a creature called a Zuvembi in a single book. And so what did Marvel writers do? Well, they just took the word Zuvembi. So then, what is a Zuvembi in terms of the Marvel Universe? Well, it is definitely not a zombie, I can tell you that for sure if the Comics Code Authority comes sniffing around. But the Comics Code Authority has fortunately been dead for years. So what's a Zuvembi? It's a zombie. Of course it's a zombie. Where else did you think I was going with this? So all of that long tangent to say that Simon Williams is back, returned to unlife as a... And not sure what to do with him just kinda staggering around their headquarters, the Avengers decide to seek out an expert in the voodoo magic that has apparently caused this and take Simon to New Orleans. Once there, Scarlet Witch is able to track down the one responsible for Simon's resurrection, a villain by the name of Black Talon, and the Avengers are able to defeat him pretty easily, but they learn 2 interesting things in the process. First, it's revealed that Black Talon did not choose to revive Wonder Man at random. He was hired to do so, though he will not reveal by who. Far more concerning, however, is the fact that even after the Necromancer is defeated, Wonder Man is still active. Rather than simply being dead again, as corpses are known to do, he is still walking around. This pattern continued as Wonder Man's condition just kept improving for some reason. After only a few short issues, he was back to full form, as if he had never died in the first place. This was not an intended effect of Black Talon's magic, and no one, not even Simon himself, knew why on earth it was happening. The explanation would be given in Avengers issue 160, revealing that all of this was another plan orchestrated by Eric Williams, the Grim Reaper. Though, maybe orchestrated is giving him a little bit too much credit there, as he only actually planned for about half of this. Eric had apparently acquired his brother's corpse again, and then hired Black Talon to turn him into a zombie. Crap, Zuvembi! Reaper then just kinda packed the undead man into a shipping crate and dropped it off at Avengers Mansion to psychologically torment the heroes. Grim Reaper hates the Avengers, obviously, and he has a particular hatred of Vision, whose mere existence he sees as a mockery of his brother's life. This plan didn't really go anywhere, though. Simon did not attack the Avengers or anything, he just kinda stumbled around and was a little bit unsettling until the Avengers got the problem resolved. This does not, however, answer the question of why Wonder Man remained alive after all of that nonsense, and this is where the retcons come in. Over a decade ago, in the comic where Simon died originally, it was stated to be due to a weird sci-fi form of radiation poisoning. His cells were deteriorating and that was slowly killing him, but now it was revealed that Baron Zemo misdiagnosed that condition. What was actually occurring here was a form of transformation. Wonder Man's cells were turning from physical matter into something referred to as living energy. As retcons go, this is actually a pretty understandable one. Zemo saw the cells turn from matter to energy and incorrectly identified that as the cells breaking down and dying, which I will say does feel like a believable scientific mistake to make. Once enough of Simon's body had underwent this metamorphosis, it overloaded his mind and basically sent him into a coma. Checking his life signs in this state did not yield any results because there were no life signs to find, at least not in the traditional sense. He was not a physical being anymore, he was just energy in the shape of a man. Putting all of this information together, it means that Wonder Man had never actually died. This death that had been haunting the narrative for over a decade was not real. It was just something that seemed a lot like death from the outside, but he was perfectly alive in there. Whew, comic books! Simon's living status is why the magic affected him in the way that it did. Black Talon's voodoo reanimated his body and provided an unintentional jumpstart to the dormant consciousness that still existed within it. It took Simon's mind a little bit to shake the death that he had been experiencing, but once he woke up, he was back to normal. Taking a brief aside for a moment, if this seems like a strange way to undo a decade-old death, yeah, it's because it absolutely is. The real-world story of why Wonder Man was brought back in the Marvel Universe is a quick but very funny one. Shortly before this, Marvel had taken one of their popular characters, Luke Cage, and given him the new superhero codename of Power Man. Then, right after that, DC Comics had separately created a new character named Power Girl. Annoyed by the similarity in these characters' names, Jim Shooter, the writer of this Avengers arc, had decided to bring back Wonder Man, basically just as a shot at DC and Wonder Woman. If DC was going to make Power Girl after Power Man, then Marvel was going to get Wonder Man back. Jim's annoyance is not entirely unfounded here, as he claims that DC put in an official complaint when Marvel published Wonder Man the first time years prior. But that claim has never actually been proven. We do not know if that complaint is real or not. Regardless though, the revival of Wonder Man is absolutely because Jim Shooter was just petty about DC and Power Girl. You would be stunned how many decisions in the comic book world are just made off of creator pettiness. Marvel would reference this incident later though, specifically in a What If comic called What If Wonder Man Were a Woman and Power Man Were a Girl. It's not actually a full storyline though, it's just the title, this one panel, and then a fake note from DC's lawyers advising Marvel not to print the gag. Getting back to in-universe things, before we continue the history of the character, let's talk again about Wonder Man's powers, because his metamorphosis into an energy being changed them substantially. The exact nature of Wonder Man's form is vague and unclear. He is now composed entirely of something called IONIC ENERGY, and IONIC ENERGY is not real. It is made-up comic book sci-fi nonsense, which is completely fine. Comic books are where comic book nonsense should be, but it does make his abilities a little bit hard to define. This does not mean that Simon is a ghost. He is made of energy, but ionic energy can apparently act like matter enough in the right circumstances. He can interact with the physical world, touch things, lift things, punch things, whatever. On the other side of this though, it is very difficult for Wonder Man's opponents to hurt him. His ionic form is essentially indestructible, and the very few things that can harm him can only do so temporarily. The closest you can really get to killing Wonder Man is dispersing him. It is possible to scatter his energy form, spread it across a wide enough area that he loses control over it, and that basically kills him, but he will always come back. His energy can be collected by various means. Scarlet Witch has used magic to condense a scattered Wonder Man before, and even without outside interference, it appears that with enough time, his energy will collect and reform naturally. In a sort of opposite situation to this, his energy can also be contained. This does not happen much, but the one main case in which it did is one of the weirdest beats in Wonder Man history, so I definitely have to address it. In a relatively recent comic, Uncanny Avengers from 2015, Wonder Man was doing a team-up with Rogue, and Rogue tried to absorb Wonder Man's abilities, with Simon's permission just to give her a temporary boost, and she got a little bit more than she bargained for. Rather than just absorbing Wonder Man's powers, Rogue absorbed Wonder Man. Rogue absorbs energy, and Simon is made of energy, so she just kind of ended up sucking up all of him. This did not kill or even deactivate Wonder Man. He was still fully conscious in there. It was like an almost one-sided body swap situation where he just got absorbed into Rogue. He wasn't in control, he was just contained within Anna Marie for a bit. And then there's all of the general hand-wavy energy powers. You might be wondering, if Simon is made of energy, can he shoot lasers or maybe shapeshift or change size? After all, he is not a physical being and thus should not be bound by physical constraints. And the answer is yeah, he can do all of that stuff. Sometimes. Basically, for any energy-themed power that you can think of, you can probably find a comic book where Wonder Man has used it. But then it's a coin toss as to whether he will keep that ability in future appearances. This is annoying, but there is something of a canon explanation to it, which is that Wonder Man's powers are directly tied to his mental state. After all, the only thing holding Simon's body together is his consciousness. If he's doing well at any given time, then he's able to use his powers in a more refined and controlled way. If he's not doing well, then he can't do that. Unfortunately, Wonder Man is very rarely doing well. I've said a couple times that his body is entirely composed of ionic energy, and yeah, that is technically true, but I would also say that it is really composed of two things: ionic energy and raw, concentrated imposter syndrome. Simon Williams was a businessman and then ran the company into the ground. And then he was a criminal and got caught immediately. Then he was a supervillain and felt so guilty about that he couldn't continue. Then he was a superhero but faking it the whole time. Then when he tried to be a real superhero, he died. And then he was just dead, and even that did not stick. This unfortunate series of events has combined to make Simon Williams an extremely anxious man. He has tried at so many things and failed at all of them, meaning that his confidence is very easily shaken, tragically but understandably. Things were looking up for Simon a little bit after his revival. He was welcomed into the Avengers for real this time and stayed with the team for quite a while. After all, the Avengers had literally watched Wonder Man sacrifice himself to save them previously, so they had no reason not to trust him this time around. Even this was weird at times, though, because Vision was also on the Avengers during this period. And if you'll recall, Vision was based on Wonder Man's copied brain patterns. It certainly does not help imposter syndrome if there's a weird pseudo-clone of yourself also running around, but surprisingly, Vision and Wonder Man actually got along well. In a very wholesome turn of events, Vision and Wonder Man became close, and since they were similar but not identical, they began to see each other as brothers, which is very nice. I love that. It is gonna cause problems later, but for now, it's wholesome. Continuing on the good things, though, before everything takes a turn, this is also the time in which Wonder Man starts resembling the character that he's more known as today. He does not need a supersuit anymore because he's just indestructible on his own, and thus decides that he can be as dripped out as he wants on Avengers missions, and I support him for it. He also begins looking for a job outside of the Avengers, wanting something to do with his life now that it's been restored to them. He doesn't want to go back to the business world though, because that went so badly before, and thus he decides to become an actor. His reasoning for this choice is kind of depressing though. Like I said, imposter syndrome is going to be a recurring theme from this point going forward. Simon never had a lot of confidence in his heroism even after joining the Avengers for real, because, well, he first joined them under false pretenses. He always had this sinking feeling that he was just acting at being a real hero, and so he decided to turn that and act professionally. So, with renewed purpose and a new goal for his life, Simon left the Avengers and struck out for Hollywood, where things went really badly for him. Hollywood is a hard place to break into, even for a superhero, apparently, and Wonder Man just could not get any good gigs. He bounced around to a couple of productions without a lot of success, but eventually struck gold with a legitimately genius idea. There are a lot of actors in Hollywood, but there's only one actor who is literally indestructible. So, taking advantage of his unique abilities, Wonder Man became a stuntman. I love this. I think it is far and away the most interesting element of Wonder Man's character. It's always fun to see superpowered characters using their abilities for non-superheroic things, and this is a perfect application of that. Yeah, Wonder Man makes the perfect stuntman because he can give you the most realistic stunts in the business. No need for tricks or CGI, you can just drop a flaming car on this guy for real and he'll walk away perfectly fine afterwards. This one-of-a-kind angle gave Simon Williams the foot in the door at Hollywood that he so desperately needed, because he was a legitimately good actor. His earlier failings with the Avengers in his first appearance, that's because Zemo wrote a bad backstory. That was on the script, not the actor. Simon began as a stuntman, but then eventually got speaking roles, and then larger roles, eventually ending up as a legitimate full-blown movie star, who, of course, still did all of his own stunts. He did not quit superheroing entirely for this, far from it. Simon would still suit up as Wonder Man whenever he was needed, and did join more super teams as we will be covering shortly. But since this change in status quo, Wonder Man can best be described as an actor first and a superhero second, which makes him very unique among all the Marvel heroes. Let's make a real-world comparison here. Imagine that you are walking through the streets of Manhattan, when suddenly there's an explosion from a nearby building and rubble begins toppling towards you. You cannot get out of the way in time and are about to be crushed to death, but just as all hope seems lost, a glowing John Cena swoops in out of nowhere and carries you to safety. That is more or less how the civilians of the Marvel Universe would see Wonder Man. Helping out that vibe even more is the fact that his identity is fully public, maybe unsurprisingly because he doesn't wear a mask anymore. But yeah, everybody knows who Simon Williams actually is. He has admitted it and also has admitted guilt for his earlier crimes that landed him in court in the first place. But since he's done enough as a superhero and Avenger to atone for them, and is also a famous actor, which probably doesn't hurt, he has generally been forgiven by the general public. Back on the superhero side of his life, though, during his time in Hollywood, Simon would also become a regular member of the Avengers spin-off team, the West Coast Avengers. This makes perfect sense. He could continue superhero things, but also continue his day-to-day job. This is also, however, the point in which his life becomes a soap opera in and of itself. See, West Coast Avengers contains a very particular important arc for Avengers history, that being the death and reconstruction of the Vision. This was when he was rebuilt into the status quo commonly just referred to as White Vision, where he functioned perfectly fine, but lost all of his emotion and human elements that he previously possessed. This, theoretically, was a minor setback, though, just because Wonder Man was around. As I've said several times, the mind of Simon Williams was the blueprint for Vision's original consciousness, and their odd dynamic with each other has been a recurring plot point ever since. So they could just scan Simon's brain again, and then use that to reconstruct Vision's personality. Problem solved. Right? That should have been the end of it. It really should have. But when Scarlet Witch went to Wonder Man asking him for help in restoring the mind of her husband, he said no. Because he had feelings for Scarlet Witch himself. Simon, buddy, no. Wanda responds to this rationally. I'm gonna call this rational. I think that slap was more than deserved. Now, apparently, his feelings for Wanda were not Simon's only motivation for denying her request. He says something in this issue about not having a choice in creating the Vision the first time, and now that he does have a choice, he has some weird existential reservations about it. But also, like, Wonder Man and Vision were friends. They saw each other as brothers. So what a dick move this is. I will say, though, I'm not complaining about this from a writing perspective. Wonder Man's entire thing is questioning himself and his place in the world, so reservations about reviving the Vision's mind do make sense for his character. It is justified narratively, if not morally. As such, Wonder Man did genuinely apologize to Scarlet Witch shortly after this, and I guess that apology worked pretty well, because in a later Avengers series, Simon and Wanda would actually get together briefly. Wanda and Vision were separated at the time, so nobody was getting cheated on here, but Vision was still alive and around, which caused even more drama. The love triangle between Wonder Man, Scarlet Witch, and Vision is one of the weirdest in comics, and that's a very high bar. Relationship drama like this has been a somewhat consistent feature of Wonder Man, especially in recent decades. He has been on and off again with Scarlet Witch, he's dated Carol Danvers, he kissed Beast one time, which is actually a very important point to note. It is not important because it's particularly plot relevant, though. Wonder Man and Beast have been longtime friends, that's been established for decades. They're often on the same Avengers teams at the same time, and so they are very close, but their relationship is platonic. The kiss between them occurred in one Avengers comic from 1999, and it's not really romantic coded at all. This arc was one of the times when Wonder Man's energy had been dispersed and he was presumed dead for a bit. He had just recently reformed, and Beast, overcome with joy at seeing his best friend returned to life, kinda just tackles him and immediately kisses him on the mouth. I know this is a weird thing, and you would think that it is gay-coded. I promise you it's not. Beast's characterization during this era was it's very manic. That is the best way that I can describe it. So why do I bother bringing it up if it's not queer-coded and is just Beast being a little bit crazy? Well, it's because this moment is important to real-world queer comics history. This panel right here is the first on-page kiss between two men in Marvel history. The first romantic kiss between two men in Marvel would be a decade later in 2009, but still, it's an interesting fun fact that this technically takes that title, especially because it makes Wonder Man an excellent case study in the waning influence of the Comics Code Authority. See, I know what I'm doing when I structure these videos. That little tangent I went on about the CCA earlier was not just for the one bit. It is very funny that in Wonder Man's early days, they had to dance around even calling him a zombie, but then decades later, here he is kissing Beast, which never would have been allowed. Though, right after I toot my own horn about the structure of my videos, it is going to get a little bit scattered as we reach the end of this one, just because that's kind of what's happened to Wonder Man's actual history as well. Simon Williams as a character has not fallen out of favor by any means. He was a member of a main Avengers roster as recently as 2018, and he still gets comic appearances on a very regular basis, even up to this year. Wonder Man's in a lot of books, but like many characters in this sphere of the Marvel Universe, he is more of an Avengers character than he is a character in and of himself. Wonder Man's most recent self-titled comic was a miniseries in 2007, and the vast majority of appearances since then have been in various Avengers books. He's been on the main Avengers, the West Coast Avengers, the Uncanny Avengers, the Astonishing Avengers, and plenty of others. He's on so many different iterations of that team, but that's pretty much the only place that you can reliably find him. This does make perfect sense for his character, though. As I've mentioned, Wonder Man is typically represented as an actor first and a superhero second. He's not the kind of hero who's constantly patrolling and monitoring for threats. He is someone who other heroes call in when necessary. More recent comics have doubled down on this by making Wonder Man actively adopt a pacifist ideology, and I mean completely. Simon Williams always tries to avoid resorting to violence, even when dealing with supervillains and the like. He will still use his powers, but he will use them defensively, helping and saving people rather than going on the offensive. This leaves Wonder Man in a very interesting position, and one that is incredibly rare for ongoing comic book universes, in that right now in current canon, his arc is kind of done. It feels very complete from start to finish. Wonder Man's narrative revolves around him trying to find somewhere in the world where he genuinely fits in, and finding that does not come easy. He's been a villain, he's been a hero, he's been a normal actor, but he's always had drama and conflict during that at every turn. For all the good that he's done and lives that he has saved as a hero, Wonder Man fails quite a bit. He has died or been in a state of assumed death on multiple occasions, and his actions and failures have even caused the death of others. There's a very important Avengers arc revolving around Wonder Man where he actually fails to stop a bomb going off, and this results in the death of millions of aliens, if not billions. I don't know if the number is ever actively confirmed. Imposter syndrome, trauma, and death have followed Wonder Man for decades, but recent comics have shown him healing from that surprisingly effectively. He likes acting, and he's good at acting, so this is still his primary thing. But when lives are in danger and people need saving, Simon is more than happy to suit up as Wonder Man again and get back out into the field. Not to stop evil necessarily, but to protect the good. He is making a difference and helping people, himself included, in a way that he feels confident about, which is something that the character was looking for decades. This is what I mean when I say his arc feels finished. He's in a genuinely pretty good place. Of course, given the nature of comic books, I don't think he's going to stay mentally healthy for very long. Something horrible will inevitably happen to Simon Williams, causing him to spiral again, as comic books do what comic books are gonna do. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens sooner rather than later, depending on the success of the upcoming MCU show, and as I wrap this video up, let's talk about that show for just a minute. I am of course making this video before the show comes out, so I'm just operating off trailers, no spoilers here, but I do think what they're doing with the trailers is really interesting and worth addressing. The show looks like it's obviously going to deviate from the comics quite a bit, as it is focusing on the Hollywood aspects of Wonder Man, which happened way after his origin. I do think that's a good call, though, as the Hollywood elements are the parts that the character is most known for, and I'm really intrigued by the direction they are taking that in. The pitch from the trailers seems to be that Wonder Man within the MCU was originally a character from a cheesy old superhero movie, and in the modern day, Simon Williams is a regular man auditioning for a reboot of Wonder Man, and presumably given some sort of superpowers in the process of that. Different as this origin might be, I do think it really has the potential to set MCU Wonder Man up for the same thematics that the comic one has. If Simon is a regular actor who gets superpowers while playing a superhero in a movie, that could easily lead to some of the same imposter syndrome topics. The show is also openly stating that it is going to address the idea of superhero fatigue and the real-world public's perceived declining interest in superhero movies. And the irony of the MCU making a show addressing superhero fatigue, while the trailers for Avengers Doomsday are basically just saying, hey look, we're doing another Avengers movie, aren't you excited, is not lost on me. I can't speak too much more to the show because obviously it's not out yet, but I wanted to bring it up just because I am really looking forward to it actually. If they get the right amount of meta with the movie narrative and hit the thematics correctly, it could be a great character study on Simon Williams that I'm really looking forward to. Though, with the show's quality as of yet unknown and his character arc in the comics pretty well completed, it is really hard for me to make a prediction as to where Wonder Man in general is going next. It feels kind of bad and weird to say that I'm waiting for something horrible to happen to poor Simon again, but I do think it's inevitable. Conflict is necessary for a good story after all, and Wonder Man's time in Marvel is nowhere near done. For now though, Simon Williams is doing pretty good. And I think we can let him enjoy that for just a couple more years. It's pretty well deserved after all the stuff he's been through. Thank you all so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. This was, of course, just a quick summary of Wonder Man's history. There are more arcs with him that I could have talked about due to his long tenure on so many Avengers teams, but this should give you a pretty good overview of the general vibe and origin of the character. Quick plugs and such as usual. First off, I have a Patreon. If you go and check that out, you can find early and ad-free access to all of my videos, as well as a Patreon exclusive video every month. There are 5 hours and counting of exclusive content over there already. My username there is the exact same as it is here. There's also a link to that in the description of this video and on my channel page. It's very easy to find. And as always, extra special shout out to everyone who already supports me over there. It really does help me continue making these videos for you guys. Additional shout out to Ruben Perez, the artist I work with for these videos. He drew the poses of the character that you've been watching talk at you all this time. Go check out his work if you have a chance. And with that, my first video of 2026 is done. I don't necessarily plan to do an MCU tie-in topic for every project that they're releasing, but come on, the actor superhero getting a show, that was a layup that I had to do a video on. So thanks to Marvel Studios for making the topic choice easy this time around.